EDFX348 Reflective Video. Class context. I had a Year 10 English class of mixed ability. Some students did suffer from anxiety, which means that they couldn't be called upon in class. So in this case, I actually couldn't ask these students questions in the middle of class and have them answer. I did find that they were perfectly willing to participate in the lesson and quite enjoyed what I had created for them. Year 10 English was studying the unit Place in Australian Narrative Text. This unit involved exploring how different authors and artists create a sense of place within Australia and what that sense of place was. For this unit, as a formative assessment task, they needed to write a narrative about their own sense of place within Australia based on 6 Australian visual stimuli. Most of my lessons were focused on assisting students with writing their assessment. However, this was my last lesson of the term with them and their last English lesson. So for this lesson, I designed an activity that would allow students to portray their knowledge about a sense of place in Australia in a creative way. So students for this lesson in groups were to create an Australian-themed board game that would be sold to an international market. So this was my lesson plan for the last day. So how can we engage with our own sense of place within Australia was my focus question. And this was the template board game that I used for students, and I created this Hasbro design challenge instruction sheet for them. Links to Australian teaching standards. So 1.2, understanding how students learn. Understanding how students learn helps teachers to develop appropriate activities and tasks that challenge and enhance individual and group learning. So my Year 10 class in previous lessons with previous activities were very hesitant to speak up. As per feedback with my supervising teacher, I was told I needed to create activities that allowed for students to interact with each other. So I believe that I met this standard as I understood that students in my class suffered from anxiety and could not be called upon in class. So by having group tasks and having these students interact with their peer groups instead of the whole class, the students were able to comfortably understand and relate to the content about their learning and share ideas with their peers rather than the whole class. Standard 2, know the content and how to teach it. I believe that I incorporated aspects of Standard 2 in this lesson as I redesigned this lesson in accordance with the standards and with feedback from not only my supervising and tertiary teacher, but also comments from the students. This lesson catered not only for the different needs of the students, but also helped wrap up their content for the last lesson. In regards to comments, this lesson was done in groups as it allowed for the sharing of ideas and an opportunity for students to verbalize with their partners. So group projects were designed to help students develop a host of skills that are increasingly important in the professional world. It is important that I still incorporated content from the unit, even though the students had already completed their assessment task. Focus Area 3.4, select and use resources. From a constructivist perspective, knowledge is actively constructed by the learner, and knowledge construction is the process of meaning making through connection with prior knowledge in the real world. The resources that I used and created for all my tasks had to be in accordance with what students were learning in the unit. Students were instructed to create their board game based on prior knowledge and experience. So select and/or create and use a range of resources, including ICT, to engage students with their learning. I believe that I incorporated and created more enticing and engaging resources in accordance with advice from my supervising teacher. I adjusted my resources for my final lesson to further engage students with the lesson and the content. Focus Area 3.6, evaluate and improve teaching programs. Feedback is a key element in language learning. It can promote minimal or deep learning. Feedback is information provided by an agent regarding some aspects of one's task performance. For the ATEL standards, I had to evaluate my personal teaching and learning programs using evidence, feedback from students, and student assessment data. Prior to this lesson, I had asked students what type of activities that they wished to do for their last lesson. I was instructed that they wished to do something more creative, which was why I designed the Australian board game unit. One of the factors which was of great importance in dealing with feedback was that it helped students to reconstruct their knowledge. So based on previous feedback, I was able to create a lesson that would creatively allow students to reconstruct their knowledge and wrap up their unit as a whole. Student feedback and reflections about my teaching practice. At the conclusion of the lesson, students wrote a reflection about my teaching practice and about what aspects they liked most about my teaching. Most students I found quite liked most of the activities that I created for them, but a class consensus found that most students enjoyed the last activity, the board game, which can be seen right here in the class planning activities and group activities. How can I improve for next time? Based on feedback from not only my supervising teacher, tertiary teacher, and students, I feel that I appropriately incorporated the standards and advice into my teaching practice. From my prac, I understood the quality of my interactions with students and how these interactions not only helped me understand them as a teacher, but also assisted me in creating work that would benefit and engage them at the same time. The quality of these interactions and the relationship between student and teachers is very important for student engagement. For my future teaching practices, I will endeavour to create a more open environment for interactions between my student and I, which will allow me to teach more effectively.